set of lectures, this video lecture part 1 and part 2, 8A and 8B, are about two American composers. We're calling this American innovation. And sorry, Canadians, we're sort of usurping that word. We mean the US. But so the first little lecture, I'm going to try and keep this as short as I can, is about the American composer Charles Ives. And the second part of this is, it looks like a separate lecture. It's going to be labeled 8B, and it's about John Cage. It's actually a reproduction of a humanities course lecture, and I think it's actually plenty good for what we need. I think it will give you a good scope of John Cage's innovation. I hope. So we'll find out. So Charles Ives. Charles Ives is has always been, I think, an interesting sort of do-it-yourself kind of composer to Americans. Perhaps, I don't know, Charles Ives was born in 1874, so he's a little bit old for our 20th century things, except that the things that he does in his works are actually very modern-ish. They're 20th century kinds of things. In a way, he's a sort of precursor. Charles Ives was considered kind of an oddball at the time, and I think is still not really necessarily mainstream American. Not everybody loves Charles Ives. I don't love Charles Ives so much, but I try to appreciate Charles Ives. Charles Ives was an insurance salesman. He was not a professional musician. He falls into a category that we call American experimentalism. Not at all with the long pedigree of the high modernists like Milton Babbitt or the Second Viennese School, who had all that Leipzig training and Zukunftsmusik behind them. Charles Ives learns to play the piano from, I think, his mother, and is really a self-taught composer and musician in a lot of ways. Oh dear. Hold on. Charles Ives is certainly pre-war, pre-World War I, but still some of his ideas really look forward and appear to be separate, its own separate ism from some of these modernist ideas. Ives would say that he loved to stretch his ears, not literally, but he loved to do things like hearing tunes in two keys at once. He learned to play a hymn tune in one key and sing it in a different key at the same time. You go try that. How exciting that is. He would paraphrase familiar tunes. He would start off thinking like, yeah, I'm going to do this like Yankee Doodle. And then by the middle of the tune, he just sort of sketches it. It's not quite the same. His music is full of signifiers. We're going to use that word heavily in postmodernism. His music is full of snippets of things like patriotic tunes, Yankee Doodle, Rally Round the Flag, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And we're supposed to think, oh yeah, that reminds me of a 4th of July picnic. Or it reminds me of going to school and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Or maybe a hymn tune that reminds us of being in a Protestant church in New England. So his music is full of actual snippets of other things, signifiers. And he makes a sort of sound collage that sometimes is hard to understand what we're hearing. He actually layers things in without regard to, are we at the beginning of a phrase or not? He just mashes things together. So it becomes a sort of paste, a sort of mix of sound clips that are sort of chaotically thrown together. The term for this is called phantasmagoria. Phantasmagoria, a fantastic, whimsical mixture of stuff without a set form. It's just poured in there. The piece by Ives that you're listening to is made up of layers of signifiers that are quintessentially New England. They belong to the northeast seaboard of the United States, especially Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, those parts of the eastern United States that are called New England. Like the Pines of Rome evoke Rome, his music is meant to evoke New England. Some of the snippets, we think of like a town meeting, having a town meeting and yelling at your politicians and saying, you got to listen to me because I'm here. That's a very New England kind of thing. Every man for himself. Everybody should succeed on their own without help from others and do it yourself. That kind of can-do kinds of things. We're talking about small New England towns, outspoken individualists, and hymnody in the Christian worship services, hymnody that comes from Puritan and Protestant traditions. It's no longer Puritan, but it comes from that. When you listen to this music of Ives, in the excerpt you have to listen to, I started to make a list of all the snippets that are written in to this piece, and I gave up because there were so many that I just thought I'm not going to list them all. You could read about them. But for example, some of the snippets that we would hear in this piece that evokes the 4th of July, we're evoking a picnic. Like a little boy wanders off to the side of the picnic, and he sort of sees this vision of maybe past soldiers and 4th of July, America, independence, red, white, and blue, read the Declaration of Independence, kind of the 4th of July didn't just used to be a shopping holiday or fireworks, but it also often, you can read this in Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, it was traditional to read the Declaration of Independence out loud and sort of celebrate the ideals upon which the country were founded. It's taken very seriously, quasi-religiously, in this sort of turn-of-the-century New England setting. So some of the tunes that he piles into his Phantasmagoria, Yankee Doodle, the U.S. National Anthem, the one that is hard to sing, but we have it. A tune called the British Grenadiers that was popular with both American and British Revolutionary soldiers and stays in the repertoire. A quasi camp song or what am I thinking of? Like quasi Stephen Foster song, Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground. He writes the program of his piece into the actual score. The little boy wanders away from the picnic. He sees a misty vision. It's actually non-musical stuff written right in the score. It is an evocation of the past. Like Pines of Rome was imagining the past vision of Roman soldiers marching up the Appian Way, this piece is an evocation of the past, the Revolutionary War history of New England, where really you could say that the sort of the governmental center of the United States is sort of, the ideas are sort of born there. We hear soldiers marching. The music itself, by incorporating all these different tunes from different kinds of people, different stratas of people, is meant to evoke democracy. The 4th of July is for everyone. This is a kaleidoscope of America. It's egalitarian. There is no class structure. Everyone's America is put into this piece, and that's really kind of cool. This optimistic quality of this kind of American view, like, yes, everything is great, becomes essential in works like Copeland's Billy the Kid from 1938 that I've already talked to you about Copeland. There is a certain amount of optimism. It is, if I say it from a 21st century perspective, it is perhaps a blind spot. On the other hand, it does not overtly exclude anyone from enjoying this optimism. Again, these troublesome things, social issues and context, makes us think about our music in interesting and sometimes uncomfortable ways. So that's Charles Ives' sort of, that's how he works. And I think when you hear it, you'll hear those kinds of elements. So one of the elements for Charles Ives is Phantasmagoria. That is a piling together of signifier pieces of music. We hear polytonality and polyrhythms. That's the second sound characteristic, polytonality, polyrhythms. We hear an obvious program evoking the past. An obvious program evoking the past. This little video lecture is just part of video lecture 8. You need to now turn to the video lecture that talks about John Cage, and it will talk about the different innovations of John Cage, at least as many as I can squeeze into that video. So there you go.